So I was rewatching some YouTube videos from Cinemassacre and Channel Awesome, and two of them I was watching in Pacific were the two videos that they did 6 years ago or so at James's place, at James Rolfe's home, basically in his basement, which he basically makeshift, kind of remodeled makeshift into his own personal little video store. Memorabilia, if you will, a little video store museum. It's not an actual video store, but obviously when you go down there, it gives you that feeling of what it was like and everything. And he did this video along with one of his friends from Too Many Games, and Doug Walker, Nostalgia Critic, and Brad Jones, the Cinema Stop. And they were just talking about the video store memories and, what it was like to go to the store, what stores they were, going to as kids, and before, the big blockbuster thing came about and all that. And what were the differences between certain stores and all that. And it got me thinking, I haven't really specifically come out and done my own, take on that. I have talked about my video store memories somewhat in passing through a lot of videos, but I haven't really straight up talked about my video store memories almost like from the beginning. Basically what was the first specific video store memory, or how well do I remember going to the video store and renting movies and renting games and so on. So I figured I might as well take an opportunity here while I'm letting my turkey pot pie I'm going to eat for lunch cool off. But I thought I'd take the opportunity to talk about that here, if you will. And shout out to Cinemassacre and Channel Awesome, mostly James, Doug, and Brad, and the other guy from Too Many Games for doing that video that they did 6 years ago. And with that said, let's get on to my take on the video store rental memories. So I think the earliest that I do remember as far as video store rental memories go was when me and my family lived in Hayward, California. We lived on Harder Road, despite what anybody else calls it. It was Harder Road, and I know this because I recently looked up on Google Maps via my MetaQuest. I looked up Harder Road, and I saw some apartments that looked very familiar, painted differently, but very familiar to what we used to live in back in the day. But anyway, to get back on point, I remember the first time, I should say, ever going to a video store back around 84, 85, 86, 87. And it was mainly for neighborhood video. And neighborhood video was off of Mission Boulevard in Hayward, California. And I remember this because basically it would be ironically, this is how good this memory is for me, or how fondly I do remember this. It was right at the this turn on Mission Boulevard to where you'd go to where if you wanted to turn to the left, you had to, of course, get into the turn lane. To get to, when you got to the traffic light, to the stoplight, if you will, and wait for it to turn, and wait for the green arrow to show up before you can turn. And I remember this because on the left side, when you're getting ready to turn to the left, to go towards, where my grandparents were on Thomas Avenue, basically on the left there was a 7-Eleven. And on the other side was a little shopping center. And in this shopping center was like a grocery store. I don't know if it was a grocery outlet, because I don't know if grocery outlet was around then, but it was a grocery something. It wasn't a Safeway or a Lucky's or anything like that. It was called grocery something. I can't remember. I can't specifically remember. It was called grocery something. And in the shopping center, along with the grocery store, was a video store called Neighborhood Video. And I remember Neighborhood Video because, as I've alluded to in the past when I've talked about Transformers the movie, Neighborhood Video was the place where I first rented Transformers the movie. That's right. Basically, my parents, one day we went into Neighborhood Video. It was around 87 because that's when the movie came out on VHS. But it was around that time frame, and we saw, or at least I saw, a big poster, in the window that said "Coming Soon, Transformers the Movie." And then, as you're walking up to the checkout desk, or walking towards the checkout desk, there's a there was a white board if you will, where you would write with marker instead of like chalk. So it was like a whiteboard in the back, and on one side it would say what has arrived, what the new releases were, and what was coming soon, along with the dates. And on the coming soon said Transformers the movie, said the date, and I asked my mom and dad if they could rent it for me. And they said, well, if you do good in school, you do good at home, we'll do that. And so I lived up to my end of the deal. And that weekend, they rented Transformers the movie for me the moment it came out. Well, basically the moment it came out. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to find what word to say here. But the moment it came out, they knew basically because of the date and everything, they rented. They called up Neighborhood Videos, said, can we reserve this? They said, no problem. And next thing I know, we go and pick it up, and we're watching Transformers the movie for the first time ever. And as I've alluded to in the past when I've talked about this, it was a bit of a shock of how different it was from the cartoon. I mean, basically you could put me in that category, me and my family in that category of being surprised at how violent it was. I think my mom, sitting on the couch, I can vaguely remember this, but I think her reaction was like that of being very surprised and everything. But yeah, to get back to the video store memory, that's one of the first ones I remember. And I remember it as, very well, because not only would I rent Transformers the movie, but I would rent G.I. Joe, I would rent Transformers, the volumes of, Family Home Entertainment, FHEs, what have you. That is until I found out my cousin, who's 2 years older than me, had those, and he actually gave them to me about a couple of years later for Christmas. But he did it in the veins of a certain red-suited present giver, if you know what I mean. But point is, I would do that. I would go and rent those movies. Rent those movies or episodes on VHS. My sisters would rent their things, with the cartoons as well on VHS or whatever. And then my parents would rent something they wanted. In fact, my parents would rent something individually for each other as well as together. Like my mom would want to rent something that's either romantic or comedy or dramedy or romance drama, whatever. My dad, he would be more like, I want the action, I want the horror. And he would rent some of that stuff, but they would wait until we were asleep in bed before, he would put that on, or they'd put on what my mom rented and all that. So, those are basically my memories right there from, first being in the video store at Neighborhood Video. And also Neighborhood Video was where we started renting Nintendo games as well, and I think we even rented Atari games there, because yes, whether people want to admit it or not, I think Atari games were being rented out at that time, even after the crash, and even before then. So I think Atari games were being rented out. So we would rent games as well. But it wasn't my only video store memory. It wasn't my only store memory. Years later, we moved to Fremont, and there was a video store right close by us called K-Video. And basically, I've talked about this before, and it's very embarrassing, but I went with my neighbors one time because they invited me along, and I just ended up throwing a tantrum, because I saw Transformers the movie again, they're ready for rent, and they just said, okay, let's just rent it for him to shut him up, and that is embarrassing. That was kind of an embarrassing moment for me back then, but they understood. I did apologize. I did say I was sorry, and they said, and thankfully they were understanding. They're like, hey, don't worry, we get it. You weren't expecting that, but thank God, we had good neighbors. We had good neighbors right across the street from us. And we all had something in common. The neighbors next to us, the neighbors across the street from us, we all had something in common that allowed us to all get along. I don't know what it was. Either it was our faith, or the fact that some of us like Transformers, and so on and so forth. But anyway, to get back on topic. I'm trying to, hold on, I'm getting tongue-tied. Sorry, got tongue-tied there. But yeah, to get back on topic, that was probably not a very good moment for me. But hey, I was a kid back then. I was a kid, didn't know any better, and I just blew up. something just snapped in me, okay? Something just snapped in me, So, yeah, I didn't know any better. It was my first time being with other people besides my family and besides my fellow classmates at school. So, again, I didn't know any better. And, again, I did apologize, and they accepted the apology. My mom apologized on my behalf as well. So, yeah, it was just one of those instances that basically you look back on with not fondness, but with the mindset of, man, I could be a brat sometimes when I was a kid, and yeah, I think we've all had, a moment like that. We look back on it like, what was I thinking, as a kid at that time? But it wasn't just, like I said, movies we rent from K-Video. We'd also rent video games and everything as well. But this was also around the time Blockbuster was starting to come into our neck of the woods. I mean, it was already blowing up all over across the country, but there were some towns and cities that had yet to get it. And we were finally in Fremont, and I think even Haywood by extension, we're getting a Blockbuster. We were getting Blockbusters now. And so my parents decided, let's go check it out. And when we first walked in, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so much bigger, so much better. It's got more variety, not just movie-wise, but game-wise. And, and speaking of movies, and James Rolfe said this in his video, one thing we were happy about when it came to Blockbuster was there was a whole wall of movies, if you will. There was a whole wall of movies that, had, basically, I'm trying to find the right word to say, but it's a whole wall of hold on. Yeah, sorry about that. I was going to have a brain fart there. I had to stop for a second. But like I said, there's a whole wall of movies to where you could just, not worry. That's what I was trying to say. You would not have to worry about not getting a copy unless it was a really, really popular movie. That was coming out to VHS or DVD or whatever, but you wouldn't have to worry about not getting a copy because there'd be like 2 or 3 copies of a movie right behind the case. Yeah, the case would be empty, the case that, gets sold retail-wise, but yeah, the case would be empty, but you would see about maybe 1 or 2 VHSs behind there, or 1 or 2 or 3 DVDs behind there, or even later on, before the rental store started to go down, you see like 1 or 2 or 3 Blu-rays, But back then, when it was just VHS, you would see 1 or 2 or 3, VHSs of that movie. So you didn't have to worry that much unless, like I said, it was really, really popular, of getting a copy to watch for that night or watch for that weekend. You didn't have to worry about that. You didn't have to worry about that. And the same with the video games. The video games are a little different, though, because sometimes you would only get like, one opportunity. You only get like one opportunity to get a game that you wanted to play. And they would only have like 1 or 2 copies of said game. I mean, later on they rectified that, thank goodness. But you'd only get like 1 or 2, NES copies of, let's say, WWF WrestleMania, or WWF WrestleMania Challenge, or you'd get 1 or 2 copies of Super Mario Brothers 2, and so on and so forth. And it was like, well, it's going to be a 1 out of 50 shot. It's going to be a 1 out of 50 shot. But sometimes, sometimes what we would do, me and my family, is we would figure out, okay, when is the best time to go? And I think my parents and even my sisters found out from friends, at school and friends at work, that the best way to get a copy of a game that you want to have for your kids to play for the weekend, or get a movie that is really hot, really popular, everybody wants to see it, but every time you try to go later in the day, it's not there. People have always told them, they gave them this advice: go early. Go early. Even if you have to take the day off, or you have to make an excuse saying, hey, I got an appointment and all that, go early to get the movie or get the game, before anybody else. And guess what? That advice would pay off, because as soon as the store would open, or maybe an hour or so after the store would open, you'd go in, see, okay, the game's right there, get the game. You'd go over to the movie you want to get. Oh, there's the movie. Get the movie, check it out, and you'd be good. You'd be good for the rest of the weekend. So yeah, when Blockbuster came around, it was a huge deal, and again, you didn't have to worry about missing out on a copy, but unless it was a really hot item, to rent, game or movie-wise, you had to be there early. You had to be like quick on the draw, from what I understand, or from what I've learned, I should say, from what I've learned. But Blockbuster, Blockbuster wasn't the only place we went to. There was also, when we moved back to Hayward, mainly on the border of San Lorenzo and Hayward, mainly around the border of San Lorenzo and Hayward, my oldest sister got a job. She was at that age. I think she was 16 in 95, not 95, but she was 16 in 91. And she had just got a job at the newly opened Ultimate Video. That's right. It was called Ultimate Video. I'm not joking here. It was called Ultimate Video. And one would think, and I thought about this even at 12 years old, I don't know why, but one would think, oh, it's owned by the Ultimate Warrior, but it wasn't. It was just called Ultimate Video. And the reason it was called Ultimate Video is it was basically going to be locally and maybe even regionally, it was going to be, the video store that gave you everything, that had an unlimited supply of everything. That it attempted essentially to want to outdo Blockbuster, and that's why it called itself Ultimate Video. And it did live up to, its namesake, because it had a lot. It had a lot of movies, a lot of copies of one movie that sometimes you go to Blockbuster, it won't be there. Well, you'd have to go over here, and fortunately you'd actually have an extra copy or two on hand. Same with video games and all that. And like I said, my oldest sister ended up working there, and one of the advantages, because she was working her way up and showing that she would be there every day to work, one of the advantages that she would have, and I'm sure this went with the other co-workers of hers, one of the advantages is she could actually bring home a movie before it officially released, on VHS. And basically what she would bring home is one of those movies that they would just pop into, pop into preview, if you will. It's kind of like, I would say, I'm trying to find the right word to say. I'm trying to find the right word to. It was kind of like, basically like a screener. Essentially, this is what it was. It was the full-length movie, but as a screener. But it wasn't just any kind of full-length screener version movie on VHS that, they got to take home and show to the family and all that before it officially came out. No. It was actually just, as you saw it in theaters. Like I remember one year, because she was working at Ultimate Video, even in 94, believe it or not. And the reason I remember this is because one of the last movies I saw before my mom sent me out to go live with my dad in Kansas was Ace Ventura: Pet Detective in theaters. And I enjoyed it, and I loved the movie. So my sister, who was working at Ultimate at that time, she had been working there, I think, for 3 years now. I'm not really sure. Or something. I can't remember. I can't remember if it had been 3 years, because I know we were going back and forth, if you will. And I think she did kind of work there in 91, had to leave because she was going to have a child. And then I think they took her back when we came back or something like that. I can't remember. But I do know she was there she was there to the point that she was able to bring home the movies before they officially released. Kind of the previews, if you will. The screeners. And I remember one day she brought home Ace Ventura, but it was just as we saw in the theaters. It wasn't what they released later on, with the additional scenes and all that. But it was just, as it was, And I thought that was great. And everything. And I do remember, though, that even though it did have a little bit more supply-wise when it came to games and movies, I do recall that it did become difficult sometimes to rent certain games and movies, mostly games, because again, them being, not a big franchise like Blockbuster, but, basically new and trying to get to that point, when it came to new game releases, they would be limited. They would be limited. And one of the limitations they had was getting like 1 or 2 copies of said game. And I remember when Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, came out, our parents did whatever they could. Our dad did whatever he could to get us to rent it for the weekend. But every time we would go, we would be out of luck. We'd look behind the game carton or the game packaging, nothing there. We'd crap out of luck, and we would ask, "Hey, when is it going to come in? When is it going to come in?" And they would tell us this. They would tell us, "Oh, somebody's got it till then. Someone's coming in today." It basically be like a game of chess. It's like you had to maneuver yourself around that board just to try to get to the game. Well, again, going back to what I said earlier about the advice, my family, I should say, my parents and my siblings, my sisters got, years before in Fremont. Basically, they took that advice, literally here, because I think my dad remembered, well, wait a minute, what if we showed up early? Because one of the limitations that video stores had at that time is you could have the movie or game for a certain time length, but you had to return it by 8 a.m. the next morning or 10 a.m. the next morning, or else it's going to be a late fee. And it'll be beyond your three-day or 5-day rental. So basically my dad figured out, we just need to get ahead of it. And I think one of the employees even said, yeah, you need to get ahead of the game, when people return their stuff. And they would even, they didn't have to, but they would even say, hey, this is when this is supposed to come back. If you come here at this time, it should be here to be checked back in, and we can check it out for you. And that's, I believe, from what I remember, that's how we were able to play TMNT 2, the arcade game from Ultra Games, Konami, the NES version of the popular arcade game. But that was the way we were able to watch it. Oh, not watch it, but play it. And the other thing about Ultimate Video 2, is even though, like I said, my sister at the age of 16 and even 19, was working there, one of the things that they had, and this was a surprise to me, because when I first saw this, I remember the first time we were in there, and I'm walking towards it, my dad has to grab me. My dad literally, grabs me and says, oh no, you're not going in there. Because I remember looking in the back, near a wall of movies, and they had this big curtain, and I kind of peeked a little bit, and I think I kind of pulled the curtain back just a tiny bit with my index finger, and then, like I said, that's when my dad grabbed me. That right there, Ultimate Video had the adult XXX NFSW section. I'll put it that way, as cleanly as I can. It had the adult XXX NFSW section. And me being about 12 years old, and then me going on 15 later on in '94, but I was already in Kansas at that time, so I didn't get to experience Ultimate Video that much after moving back to Kansas in June of '94. But I do remember, like I said, basically, that one area, and I had to be pulled back a couple of times. It's like, oh no, you're not going in there. But yeah, Ultimate Video, trying to be, like I said, bigger and better than Blockbuster, even from a regional perspective, they had the one thing Blockbuster never did. They had the curtain. They had the curtain right there. And that was interesting. That was really interesting to see. But outside of that, we just primarily ended up sticking with Blockbuster. We ended up, when I ended up moving back to Kansas, I did get my first Blockbuster card as well when I was there. And basically, me and my dad would go from Oskaloosa to Kansas and rent from Blockbuster into, hold on for a second. Sorry, I'm doing my wash, so it's kind of distracting me a little bit. But like I said, I remember when I moved back to Kansas, I remember moving back to Kansas, me and my dad would go from Oskaloosa to Topeka, that's what I was trying to say, to Topeka, and rent movies from Blockbuster, but we also had a rental store there. And the guy that ran the place got to know me a little bit, and that was where I rented and watched for the first time All Dogs Go to Heaven 2, as well as I would rent some other movies as well. I mean, they would get the new stuff, there's no doubt. They would get it maybe a bit later, but they would get it. And since it was right there, I could just rent and be good. I don't think he had the black curtain section, if you know what I mean. If he did, I didn't see it and all that. But yeah, I could rent movies there. I could rent the VCRs there if I wanted to, and so on. So it was an interesting time. I will say that it was an interesting time. And after that, even when I moved out, I still rented from Blockbuster because it was a Blockbuster down the street from where I live, so I rented there a lot, and ended up getting movies and games and so on. But there was also the rental stores, little mini rental stores in the Dillon's store that was near me. That was actually right across the street from the Burger King I worked at. And there was even ones in Lucky's and I think Safeway as well. So there was a lot going around. There was a lot of video stores that I went into and actually rented stuff from. I mean, you even rented stuff from the library, and I remember doing that in Oskaloosa. I think I did that like a couple of times in Lawrence, Kansas. But you could go to a library and you can rent out stuff there. So that was kind of cool. That was kind of cool and everything. And then, of course, when I came back here to California, continued renting from Patterson. That's how I was, and renting from Blockbuster. That's how me and my family, me and the matriarch, we got the Beatles rock band set and everything. That's how they got this big picture, just all the heads in front of a black background of the Beatles and everything. They got it from there. So just a lot of good memories and such. And I still have some of the, and here's what's funny, I did buy movies from there. And when you open up the case to that movie, it says Blockbuster, on the case on the inside. So I still have some Blockbuster memories there. And I also have my Blockbuster card as well. But yeah, with Netflix, that pretty much being, for me, going to the video store, which was the mainstay, Blockbuster, or even the ones I've mentioned. It was always a treat. It was always fun to do, especially when it was the ones like Ultimate Video that had the black curtain and everything. And now that I think about it, I think K Video in Fremont may have had the same thing as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. For those that lived in Fremont, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it may have had the black curtain. But yeah, basically, basically overall, those are just my memories. And then, of course, Netflix came around, and I started doing that when I was living in Lawrence and continuing it when I moved back to California. And I could tell you this, when Netflix stopped doing the DVDs and Blu-ray rentals, I could tell you this right now. There was news going around, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was news going around that if you had the DVDs and Blu-ray still remaining in your queue when they shut down the rental part, the DVD and Blu-ray rental part, that you ended up getting and owning those DVDs. You ended up getting and owning, those Blu-rays. Now, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what they said, and they were supposed to send it to you. So I don't know if maybe it was sent to the old address, and the person that lives there now, just has a whole peripheral of movies of like, what am I going to do with this? But let me know if that's actually true, if that did happen. I just want to know from your own experience. And then, of course, you had Redbox. I rented from Redbox and everything as well. And, of course, that got shut down. And then, of course, you still have now empty Redbox kiosks around still, and people actually buying them up or just being given to them for free to look into, because most of them will be empty, but once in a while you'll find one that's not empty, and thus by finding one that's not empty and you're seeing there's a lot of movies on there, you're either going to keep those movies or you're going to sell them. So basically it's a win-win either way. But basically, to close out here, guys, I just wanted to come on here and give you my video store rental memories from beginning to end and all that, and just share my experiences and everything. But that's all. That's about it, guys. So in turn, let me know what in closing I should say, let me know what your memories are about the video store. What was your first memory of ever going to a video rental store? Was it a Blockbuster? Was it a local one, like with me with Neighborhood Video? When you went there, did you notice a black curtain for the first time and try to go there and then get stopped by your parents? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts and everything overall on your experiences at the video rental store from beginning to end. But that's about it, guys. So until next time, let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comment section, as well as during the live chat during the premiere. Like the video, ring the bell for notifications, subscribe to the channel, also share the video. Also click on the links in the description to find my content also outside of YouTube. And also click on the link at the bottom of the description to go to my Teespring store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else, guys. And I do apologize if I seem like I was all over the place. Like I said, I'm doing my laundry right now, getting that out of the way. But yeah, I just wanted to, like I said, while that's going on and I let the turkey pot pie cool, I thought I'd come on here and let you know about my memories when it came to the video rental store, I should say. And also in closing, shout out to James Rolfe, Cinmassacre, his friend at Too Many Games, and Doug Walker and Brad Jones, Nostalgia Critic and Cinema Snob of Channel Awesome, for doing the video they did 6 years ago. But yeah, that's about it, guys. Let me know what your thoughts are, like I said, in the comment section. And until then, I'm out.